We're here to talk about a free agent signing the Lions made earlier. This was earlier this offseason. We reacted to the news. We're going to dive into this edition a little bit more. We've done this with a few players like Roy Lopez. We've done this with a lot of the free agent signings we've made this offseason. But one of the players at a position that feels like it has a very clear path to making the roster. He's a player that former high draft pick, top of the second round back in 2019, that was added this offseason, replacing a piece that was valuable to the Lions, very valuable as a depth piece, and that was Kindle Vildor. Now, Kindle Vildor had his ups and downs with the Lions, but he was incredibly valuable in terms of the snaps that he was taking alone. He was taking big snaps for the Lions. I mean, in 2023, we signed him before the playoffs. He ends up being our starting cornerback during the playoffs. He was a good addition for us. Came in, we know that he was in the biggest moments, the San Francisco game, and yeah, there were some ups and downs there for sure, but we knew that he was going to defend a run, he was going to tackle, he was going to be aggressive, and he still did some good things in coverage. While he wasn't a big playmaker necessarily at the catch point, what he was is he was disruptive, limiting airspace in coverage specifically. So he fit what the Lions wanted to do stylistically. In this offseason, he signs with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He was an unrestricted free agent, goes and signs with Tampa Bay, and the Lions have that hole to fill heading into free agency. And they did that with a cornerback that was a former second-round pick number 34 back in 2019, and that was Rock Ya-Sin out of Temple. Up and down in terms of actually just finding snaps in the league, and this past season, he didn't play that much for the San Francisco 49ers. He's bounced around a little bit from team to team. He was with the Baltimore Ravens, but really, between 2022 and 2023, he did play a legitimate amount of snaps. I mean, in 2022, he played over 600 defensive snaps. In 2023, he played over 200 defensive snaps, so he's been on the field. He's been on the field against number one, number two receivers, 23, being with Baltimore in that division, lining across from guys like Jamar Chase, or at that time, Cleveland Browns, it was Amari Cooper. I mean, there were some dudes he was lining up against, so he's had great experience in that sense, and he's 29 years old, and he's now signing with the Lions to a very important role because it was so important with us this past season. So much about what the Lions, and we learned last season, was how important depth was. And to an extent, there's some things you just can't do about it. I mean, you can only hold 53 players, and then you have your practice squad. You can protect a few of those guys. But for the most part, it's difficult, right? Because you just can't do anything with it to a certain extent, right? But depth is important. So those guys that make the roster on the bottom of the roster, man, it feels like at some point they're going to be called upon. You know, you hope not, but at some point it feels like it's going to happen, especially at cornerback where multiple guys are constantly on the field. And for the Lions at corner, it feels like you have like four locks, right? You have Rake Straw, the second-round pick. He feels like a lock. Of course, Terrion, he's a lock. You also have DJ Reed. He's a lock. Just look at the contract that he got. And then you have Amik Robertson on the final year of his contract. It seems like he's a starting nickel corner right now. So I feel pretty good saying that he's a lock. So I love our four. I love our first four. There's some youth there. There's a veteran there. There's a couple veterans in there. And there's a guy like Amik that played outstanding inside and outside this past season, especially on the outside towards the back half of the year. It seems like now he's getting more focus in the slot. We'll see how that goes. But ultimately, that cornerback 5 position, it was essentially just like put up in the air. It's like, okay, well, now who's that guy, right? Who's that guy the Lions may lean on? And we did this recently with Grant Stewart because the whole linebacker situation, and you know this at some point, you're probably going to need one of these guys to step up. You're going to have to rely on one of these guys. And at cornerback, that's going to happen, it seems like, at some point. Just over a 1-year, $1 million deal. There's no guarantees on his contract. So based on the contract, there is no like, oh, this is the guy for corner 5. He's in an absolute battle with guys like Khalil Dorsey, who's ended up being on a 2-year contract, right? He's in a battle with Stanley Thomas Oliver. A battle going on at that back-end cornerback position. But Rock Ya-Sin is, of course, the biggest name of all, and he's the new addition to the mix that shakes it up a little bit. So today, we are going to discuss Rock Ya-Sin, what I think that he can bring to the table for the Lions, and really what he's brought to the table over the past couple of seasons, specifically the small stint we got to see in 2024 with San Fran, but really in 2023. I wanted to see the most recent. He has done a lot of good things statistically in coverage specifically. Like, for example, in 2023, 5 receptions on 11 targets in zone coverage, 3 receptions on 4 targets in man coverage, smaller sample size they had there. They graded them out really well, just under a 70. And then the year before that, in 2022, over 600 defensive snaps played. He ended up allowing 8 receptions on 20 man coverage snaps, which is fantastic. Some right in the realm of where Kindle Vildor was. This past season, Vildor allowed a 50% completion percentage. Also, only allowing 16 receptions on 25 targets in zone coverage. And again, he's doing pretty much all of this exclusively out wide, but he's done it both as a right cornerback and as a left cornerback. So statistically speaking, he's been a productive coverage piece. And again, he's played against really good competition, as we've seen. This is one of those tough players that's willing to stick their nose in, willing to play the run. Kind of the quiet period, the things are going to pop off. And we have a lot of battles, and this is one that's a fascinating battle because somebody's going to make the team. Worst, they're going to keep 5, and I'm not counting Avonte Maddox. I believe at worst they'll keep 5. It's a 6-foot, 190-pound cornerback that ran the 4.5 140 coming out, had the 1.5 flat 10-yard split, which was fantastic. 32-inch arms, very long cornerback. Rocked up cornerback, very strong cornerback, has a great body composition to be more of a press cornerback, be physical at the line of scrimmage, right? He kind of leans into that. Posted the 7-3-1 3-cone drill, which is not great from the cornerback spot in terms of the agility. And I do think that shows up in some of the level 1 coverage spots, short area consistency, the ability to be sticky underneath. Some of that kind of lapses a little bit at times. His long speed definitely isn't fantastic, but he showcased some of the burst just by the timing scores alone. So when I started to dive into this, I was like, all right, let me see the movement skills. And a lot of the things that I had seen in the short sample size when we initially signed him came back and reflected as like, oh, okay, this is still an issue for Rocky in here. And you can see it. And I think so much of it is now 29 years old. There was a lot of things coming out. He had 1 year of FBS experience coming out for the draft. We got some false movement here. He's declaring too early. You don't see maybe the patience you need to see. See the reactive athleticism, the movement skills that he does bring to the table. You do see an explosiveness when you see him transition. You see him open up. You see him open his hips. You see him get vertical. That's where you see that 1.5 flat 10-yard split really shine. And for a guy at his size that can be a little bit more upright, which is a problem for me at times, is playing a little more upright, you definitely see the burst to open his hips and go and get upfield. You see some of the explosion that he can tap into, and I think it matches up really well against bigger receivers. What I really like about him too is he does show body control that allows him to connect with routes, that allows him to trace routes. He gets in the trail coverage. He shows some success there. I would say that's at a pretty adequate level. Ultimately, he shows that ability to connect at the top of the route with body control, with really good pace, not overly aggressive into that entry point. You even see this at the catch point, right? When the ball is in the air, the way that he kind of enters into the catch point, the way that he becomes a disruptor, the way he kind of gets on the hip, he extends his length, he uses that inside arm really well, he times it up really well so he's not arriving super early. And connecting with a route at the top of the route, at the break point, that's a spot where you'll see that body control, you'll see him pace himself pretty darn well, you'll see some fluidity there, and then the length can come into play. Now, where I thought that there was some limitations, and this comes back to kind of the level 1 usage, the shifty receivers that he may have to deal with, and it could become problems, is the lateral twitch. Definitely saw the ability to deal with extended release packages. In press coverages, he could get out, right? He could deal with things that would go lateral. He could deal with upfield releases. Lateral twitch was a little bit less noticeable. And I also think that some of that was just extra footwork was necessary. And that in some of those shorter spaces, it just led to him falling behind or falling into a trail position or just doing a little bit too much there. So you didn't feel the lateral twitch, lateral burst, I feel like, as much when you got to see him specifically working underneath. However, what I did like is that, and this is what surprised me, the guy's got some fluidity and some looseness in his hips. Like, that's very noticeable. The problem is it's so noticeable because he puts himself in some really bad positions. That's the weird thing about Rocky Sin. He'll put himself in some bad spots. He gets over-aggressive in the sense of declaring his hips. That's where he gets himself into some tough positions, and this is an issue going back to college, and he still tends to do it a lot, is he declares too early. He gets himself opened up, and it's not even just his hips, it's also his shoulders. He tends to, on vertical planes, get his shoulders turned upfield. That makes it difficult for him to snap off routes, break back to the football, sink down with receivers. You'll see that become a little bit of an issue as well. But he shows some of the looseness in his hips as well as the footwork to kind of get through some of those transitions. The problem is once he gets declared, that's where he becomes limited in terms of being able to play and drive, in terms of being able to transition with a ton of efficiency to actually make a play on the football, right, to break on the ball. That's where you see some lack of efficiency is when he does end up getting his hips declared a little bit, and that's where he gets some false movement. Ultimately, there's real foot quickness to his game. You put him in press situations, like I said, he can deal with longer releases. He's got foot quickness for a bigger cornerback, which is kind of surprising to a really good extent, where he can deal with a lot of different release types. You know, he can deal with some of these hesitation releases, some of the skip releases. He can mirror those guys in this direct pedal right off the line of scrimmage specifically.
In terms of the body movement, you do recognize that there is an instinctual feel to an extent, especially in press spots like this, where you see him playing the inside leverage, wanting to force it outside, and you can see his hips get declared with that outside stab by the receiver. So he just settles himself down, gets balance, cuts it off, and then the reaction timing. When he decides to open and turn and run, the timing is fantastic so that he can stay in phase with the route. That's where his instincts tend to show up, is just a feel in these spots.
Sinking, breaking off routes, recovering at the top of the route. Some of that's because he declares too aggressively upfield, while also at the same time, to me, he just lacks seemingly some of that just natural bend to drop his weight, to snap things off, get back to the football. And I think that does show up in a couple of different areas, but again, underneath specifically, where things just feel a little bit They don't feel as fluid. They just feel like a little bit less efficient than you would expect. They don't feel overly twitchy when he's underneath. You don't feel overly agile. And I think some of that as well is he can play a little bit tall, while also at the same time, I just don't think he drops his weight incredibly well, which can put him in some tough spots. So what he does is he tends to look for contact. He gets guys to the top of the route. You saw this against Cleveland in 2023. He had a lot of success. Donovan Peoples-Jones, for example. He was working against Amari Cooper. You saw this, where he can get contact, squeeze routes really well at the top of that break point, get contact, and control the route from there. And that's where the body type that he carries makes that efficient. It makes it work. And I think about Kendall Vildor, what he did well for the Lions. And he was another lengthy cornerback that did some similar things there. He'd be physical at the top of the route. He would squeeze the top of the route. He just wasn't a big playmaker when the ball was in the air. But he did a nice job of just making situations congested as a pass catcher. And I think that's what Rock Ya-Sin tends to do as well, as he kind of leans into that. And again, it doesn't feel, out of control. He typically has a pretty nice pace with it. And that's where he'll start to gain control of the rep, is when he can find some contact and squeeze off the top of route specifically. But some of that uprightness can slow down some of his transition movements. But overall, he has an ability to gather his body control pretty well. What I like is that even though he will declare early and he'll declare aggressively, is he does a nice job of keeping his feet underneath him. You don't feel when you're watching him like he's getting out of control. You don't feel like Rock Ya-Sin is lunging or launching himself. This is not only in press, but it's also in off-man coverage, where it's like, okay, he's a little aggressive here, right? He's starting to declare. He's trying to drive on this route. He's trying to cut this thing off, and that can get him in trouble. You think about a double move. It's like, okay, he opened his hips. He's kind of stepping down. Now that's up vertical. That could put him in a bad spot. But he flew it. He has some fluidity to open himself back up. And typically what he does is he keeps his feet underneath him and he stays balanced. He's not striding out or lunging to the point where he's in a bad spot. He ends up being able to recover and show some real body control in those spots specifically. Like I said, adequate ability to trace in coverage, not overly agile when he's in trail positions, but he does have an ability to trace and kind of work underneath routes, work with route breaks from underneath. It really shows up like when we're working over routes. What I really like about his game, and I think it improves his play speed the most, is the angles that he can take. The angles that he can take when he quickly can fall into trail to get back into the play, right? They're direct angles. They typically have a nice aware path. Like, okay, I'm going to kind of undercut this, cut some of the distance that I actually have to cover here. And he's quick to like, let me get back to my assignment. He's not going to mess around with like bad angles. He's going to quickly get to where he's supposed to be. Now, the problem with that could be you're looking for contact, guy breaks vertical, and it's like, oh, okay, now you're still in trail. That can happen. But ultimately, I think that aggression does tend to move up his play speed a little bit with the way that he quickly gets back into phase.
You'll especially notice with some of the bigger receivers that don't seem to laterally threaten him as often. Look at the timing that he uses when he connects to the top of the route. It's fantastic timing to squeeze, then get his hands involved without grabbing. He has really good timing and makes it effective.
Ultimately, there is some real reactive athleticism to Rock Ya-Sin's game. That might be the biggest standout trait to his game for a guy at his size, which is a big reason why he was drafted as high as he was. In press coverage, which is where, he was kind of looked at coming out. That's an area where I went more of an average grade here. Across the board, I was a little bit more modest with how I ended up grading each trait for his game. I think for the most part, he's a little bit kind of more of the midline across the board, which makes sense. And a lot of that was just based on consistency. You'd see some beautiful reps, but you'd also see some things where you're like, oh, there's just a lot of extra footwork here. I don't love the consistency with the way that he's playing this. Ability to press, that body control does show up off the line of scrimmage. We talked about the foot quickness as well to kind of deal with different release types. He also has hip recovery when he's in press situations as well. He's got a real proactiveness to him when he's in press spots. And again, the downside is he declares too early. So this will be on vertical pushes. His shoulders will get upfield. He'll open himself up to turn and run really early. Sometimes it just feels like he's completely guessing. But I think what he does is he reads early body movement and makes the judgment on that to get to where he wants to be. And that's how he plays fast. That's how he attempts to play fast. He's very quick to read body movement. He's very quick to read a receiver's hips. Like, all right, he's opening up outside. Let me react to that. And he steps on top of that. Problem is, if that breaks back inside, and that's not what that is, now he can fall behind. But he's very proactive to read release types, and it helps him deal with like really twitchy, bursty receivers at the line of scrimmage. He can get out with some of the vertical threats, specifically when those guys trying to work downfield. And that was the big thing about him, was a little bit more quick than fast. That long speed can show up as like, okay, guys can pull away from him a little bit. But he tends to play really fast at the line of scrimmage to get where he's supposed to be. And again, even when he does get over aggressive, his recovery is noticeable. The ability to flip his hips around, get his head back around is because of some of that body control. I also like he's very strong. We talked about the build. He's long. He's strong in press. You'll see this in off-man coverage too. He tends to engage the contact, and he tends to absorb contact. You don't ever feel like he's getting bounced off the top of the route. Like DJ Reed, he can get pushed off a little bit at the top of routes. You don't really ever feel that with his game, especially in off-man coverage. His ability to step on top of those routes early, because he does play with that proactiveness, and just kind of invite contact with really good balance to it as well. The problem that I have is that when he strikes and he tries to jam guys off the line, is that one, he can be in spots where it's not actually effective. He's just kind of throwing strikes, and it's like, all right, I get it, but it's not going to do anything in this spot. There's only negative that can really come at you trying to stab the receiver at this point off the line of scrimmage.
Rock Ya-Sin had a lot of pedal in his press technique with Baltimore in 2023, but I do like the idea of also just allowing him to truly get hands on the receiver early, jam guys at the line of scrimmage, throw off timing, rather than being just so reactive, because he can be a little impatient. So I think the idea of when he can connect cleanly and he's allowed to just be aggressive at attack, I think attacking receivers can also help minimize some of the inconsistencies with the way that he has his hips.
He does kind of initiate that contact, and he typically stays, again, underneath his pads when he does things like that. His short area connection is a little bit knocked here. So like when you get into the slot, which he rarely ever plays, almost exclusively out wide, you could knock a little bit of that, specifically some of the three-way go that he could have to deal with. And again, his lateral movement to me can be a little bit of a knock as well, because he gets a little bit declared. And then you talk about some of that short area coverage spots that tends to get him in some problems specifically. He also oversets, which forces recovery spots as well. He can stick with receivers really well that are a little bit less twitchy, bigger body receivers he sticks with well. He does a good job of getting in your hip, dealing with contact. He has a lot of contact balance, so he can play that style of just being a disruptive, throwing off timing, and that a lot of times can feel like, okay, this is where he's natural, whether that's zone coverage where you can kind of jam a guy off the line. Like when you watch him in cover two and he's playing underneath zone coverage, he can be physical, he can be long, he can be disruptive, he can throw off timing, he can press you to the sideline. When you get him in those spots, he doesn't actually have to trace the route throughout. That's where he looks very comfy. That's what you feel when you watch him. All right, this looks super comfortable for him, and he just looks like he has the skill set for that if there was more consistency and patience to his footwork specifically. In off-man coverage, I think this actually may be the highest upside for him, potentially, because in off-man coverage, while I don't think, again, he drops his weight incredibly well, which can limit some of the quickness, and his plant and drive burst isn't outstanding. What I like here is that he has a active eye balance that he attempts to play with. And this translates really well to off-man coverage because he really works to find the quarterback, read through the quarterback, read through that, dive on the football. He does the same thing in zone coverage as well. He does a really good job of attempting to find an eye balance when he's working off-man coverage. He's got the power and the stoutness where it's like, all right, top of the route, you're not going to knock me off the route. I'm going to stay where I'm at. I'm going to stay square. You're not going to push me off the top of the route. So he's going to be able to stick in those spots specifically as well. That low stance and some of the bend in the stance, which also plays into that well. There's a good technique to it specifically. I just would like to see maybe more instincts in like, all right, he's jumping routes in off-man coverage simply by reading the route rather than having to see the quarterback throw the ball, right? There's times where I just didn't feel like there was always that. But
you'll see the body control tends to be better for plant drive and off-band coverage because the footwork is top down. That being said, though, one of the weird knocks that I had for him is just kind of the coverage feel around him. Like there would be times in terms of some of the instincts where you felt that he wouldn't plaster a route and he would drift backwards in zone, even if there was no one that he was actually taking away over top. Like he had a feel to play with depth and he'd read the quarterback's eyes, but he didn't always feel like he'd always plaster routes when he needed to. And he would give some windows like, oh, I'm passing it to the safety. I'm going to kind of give that off. And there would be windows that he would just allow. He would just allow some space.
But he positions himself really. He'll park down on like out routes and speed out routes, like go park in front of those. And what I like is there's a more aggressive leaning nature rather than just giving up easy throws in those off-man spots. He typically feels like he's playing a little bit more aggressive. Like, I'm going to step in front of this route. If it's a double move, I could be in trouble, but I'm going to be balanced. So at very least, I have some recovery to this. I do have a straight line burst. And this is noticeable. He doesn't feel as twitchy when you watch him. But when you see just the ability to just go and get out and run, like against Jameson in 2023, there was one vertical pass that he stuck with pretty well, and it was an incomplete pass. It was kind of like this for Jamo through his hands. That one he stuck with pretty well. The second one he got beat deep as the play went along. You're like, all right, his long speed just doesn't match up. Fair enough. Jamo's super fast. But you did get to see, like, in a straight line directly, he can go. He can absolutely get out and run. So I think off-man has a lot of upside for him. Both of those are man coverage assignments. And then in zone coverage, what he does well seems like it would fit the Lions pretty well as well. And a lot of it stems back to physicality, but I think also pacing. He tends to pace himself really well in zone. And this is almost where I feel like you see the most fluidity, and you see this in man too. When he gets in your hip, you see this at the control at the top of the route because he tends to pace himself really well. He controls himself in half turn coverage, in that side shuffle. He does a nice job pacing, kind of staying on top of routes, not getting too far aggressive on top where it's like, oh man, okay, you're just letting him sit down and break this route off and snap it off, but also not being in a spot where it's like, wow, you're way too shallow. That guy's just going to run past you. You don't feel like you feel really good balance in some of the pace that he plays with. The problem is I don't think he always stays on top of the route extremely well in terms of fading his routes in terms of staying on top and keeping a vision on routes. Like, he'll let guys just run right into his blind spot. He'll give up some easy pitch and catch opportunities because of that. But you get him in cover two, you'll see some of the lateral movement will start to stand out. You'll see the ability to be pretty urgent off the line of scrimmage and get to where he's supposed to be. He protects his leverage very well in zone coverage. He's going to get where he's supposed to be. He's going to cut things off. He's going to be strong at the point of attack. So he just does a nice job of like, all right, I'm here where I'm supposed to be. I'm cutting this thing off. And he gets and protects his leverage very early in zone coverage. And I also love the balance there too. In cover two, he tends to play with a very impactful depth between underneath receiver, between high-low situations. He plays with really impactful depth, very lengthy, squatty, and he has an opportunity to be very impactful there and kind of just disrupt the want to throw the football in those spots. And his length tends to play a huge factor in that as well. Like quarters coverage, and you also see the aggression here where it's not very hesitant. Like in quarters, oh, here's an over route. He's going to try to attack that immediately. Like he communicates it, but he's pretty aggressive to this is my assignment. I'm going to go try to take that away. And to me, that top down cover four, that seems to be where he looks the most balanced and the most controlled when everything's kind of just sitting in front of him in those spots. So ultimately, I think in coverage, there's actually a lot of things that he does well. He collapses in cover four. I think he understands his assignments. It's just, I think there's lapses that like, oh, okay, he gave up his blind spot here. Or, okay, he's kind of allowing himself to be pulled out of the play in the sense of like, hey, maybe you're in cover three. Let's read the number two receiver. And you're allowing the number one receiver on the outside to kind of just pull you out of the play because you have too much attention there. Or because you're reading the quarterback, you're not actually giving the routes enough attention, the route combinations to be a playmaker. You're not doing that as much. You're more so just focused on reading the quarterback the route, which is why I actually think off-man's better because he can read through the route concept, but he's also still relying on the quarterback's eyes, and it tends to give him a really strong balance. I think off-man actually is where he becomes more of a playmaker, which is why I really like the idea of that. So he doesn't adapt always that well in zone, but ultimately, he seems to know his assignment. He's aggressive. He'll go up and tackle. And specifically in those spots, that's where you see the length and you see his skill set kind of play out. In terms of the play speed, the biggest thing that I like there is those recovery angles that I talked about, right? It's how quick he gets into trail spots. You don't see the great agility when he's working through traffic. That tends to give him a little bit of an issue, but he works through like bunches pretty well. He tends to kind of be decisive, feel that hesitant when you watch him as a coverage piece. The only time I feel like there's hesitancy is like, all right, he's not diving on the route break. He's waiting to see the quarterback. But in terms of like, okay, where is this route going? Or like, oh, that's my assignment. I got to pick that up. He's very quick. Like everything processes pretty fast there. It's like, okay, bunch sorted out. I'm going here. The recovery acceleration, I don't think is fantastic. I think some of that's because if he has to work through traffic, it just looks slower. Well, also at the same time, and you'll see some of the inefficiency with his footwork. He does have a straight line burst, but that can be a problem. Top down, I think it's a little bit better. But specifically, you'll see some lack of long speed. The lack of closing long speed, this will be a little bit of a problem. I wish the initial burst was just more effective for him and more efficient, but the long speed isn't great. It's not to the point where it's like, oh, he's too slow. This isn't going to work because he's able to run with receivers that aren't Jameson Williams vertically, and he does it through contact, and he does it with contact balance, and he stays in phase really well. His urgency to get in phase is, I think, what helps him a ton. And then I think that he shows real ability to be effective at the catch point. His length is the biggest reason. You put him in the red zone. His contact, he doesn't get shrugged off by bigger receivers. It just doesn't. And to me, what he does, he finds the receiver before he tracks the ball. He gets himself into a lot of spots where he has to recover, which isn't great. But he finds the receiver. He's disciplined, finds the receiver. Now I'm going to find the football. And he high points at a really high level. He's really good at high point situations. So ultimately for me, he extends his arm length well. I think that his ball skills can be impactful. He just doesn't come away with the football enough as an interception artist or something like that because, oh, he's super instinctive. But I do think skill set wise, when the ball is put in the air, that's where his skill set tends to thrive. And I think about the corners that we have, like Terrion could go climb the ladder last year. He was super impactful. He was an athlete, could climb the ladder. DJ's a little bit on the smaller side, so he can actually be posted up a little bit at the top of the route. And then you throw a guy like this, and he kind of brings the opposite. Rocky Sim brings the size, the length. You're not going to post him up at the top of the route. So I feel like he's going to be a little bit more natural in those spots specifically. He fits into what they want stylistically, the toughness, but at the same time, he's coming in to fill a role that I think that he's well built to do. I think he's very well built to do it. And at the same time, he's been impactful. It's not like he's been terrible the last 3 years when he's been on the field. He's actually been good the last 3 years when he's been on the field. San Fran's kind of difficult because it really wasn't much, but I thought he was fine. It just wasn't that much there. It's an opportunity to show out a little bit through one-on-ones. I think he could have some problems sticking with players, but he could come away with the football a few times. There's no doubt dealing with some of our bigger receivers. Like I'd love to see a matchup with Tesla. I think that'd be an awesome matchup. Big receiver like that. How does that shake out? And then having to compete with guys like Lovett, who are super twitchy, that stack very quickly. His recovery ability may shine there. And it's like, oh, he's getting back into the play. That's what he's capable of, right? There's a discipline nature to him. So I think ultimately where he's at, you don't want to bet on like, oh, this is all going to come together. He's going to be that guy that they were hoping. But, and I don't even want to say that he maybe hasn't been because he's been good when he's been on the field. But ultimately, you know that it's like, okay, there's some inconsistencies here. We'll see if we can dial some of those in. But the athleticism is noticeable. The size is really good. And he's capable of playing in all different kind of coverage techniques. Like, there's nothing that he can't do coverage-wise. And I think that he clearly fits what the Lions are after stylistically here. So ultimately, Rocky Sin could be super important because Kendall Vildor was super important.